Hi, this is Louise and welcome to this week's short. What I want to talk about today is how we can't keep using old maps in order to create the new world. And where that's come from is I was recently watching the whole episode with Liz Truss as Prime Minister in the UK and what happened with the budget that her and her Chancellor proposed. And I don't know if you've been following it, but ultimately I was just watching in horror as this whole kind of piece was unfolding. And ultimately they came out with a set of proposals that did not get the trust of the markets and ultimately tanked the markets. The Bank of England actually had to intervene in order to save the UK pension fund. And it was kind of free fall, basically. And the reason why I mention that is I don't really want to get into the economics of this. I don't even want to get into the politics of this. The thing that really struck me was that where all this started was ultimately about 30 years ago when Liz Truss and her Chancellor were together at university. And they wrote a book about how they would want to lead the economy and what they would want to do in that. Now, that was great 30 years ago. But what I found fascinating is that then, as soon as they were in power, they insisted on applying what was in that book. And I get it, you can think that you were a student once and you had this vision and then suddenly, finally, 30 years ago, you get to be heading up a country. And so finally, this is your time of being able to apply these principles that you dreamed up. And what I would say is no to that. And the reason why is that maybe, and, as I said, I don't want to go into the politics of this, but maybe that had a place 30 years ago. But we can't, at this point in time, which are completely unprecedented times, just assume that we can take maps from 30 years ago and apply them to this new reality. Because we are not dealing with where we were at 30 years ago, not even 10 years ago, not even pre-COVID, which is just only 3 years ago. We are at a pivotal moment where we are being called to upgrade the operating system on this planet. And so what we need to do for that is we need to acknowledge that it's ultimately the end of one system and the beginning of a new system, which means we can't keep using the old tools, the old maps, the old thinking that got us to where we are now. We need to invent new ones. And that is the real challenge, is that we've all been formatted in what I call the old world, these all old maps, these old ways of doing things. And a lot of us have been really successful in that. We've maybe even risen to the top, like, Liz Truss rising to the top of a country. And the old world was very much based on getting power and status. So then you could do what you want. Now, that's not how we need to operate right now. Power and status is not going to resolve the problems and the issues that we have right now. Now, I do believe in influence. We need to get really good at getting influence. That is super important. And also being able to powerfully guide transformation. But it's not about having had an idea 30 years ago and then kind of rising to power and then just using that old, outdated playbook. We need to be those leaders who are willing to step into the unknown, into the uncertainty, into the place where things are not stable. Accept, and not only accept, but guide and lead profound change. And for that, we need to ourselves literally take some time to reinvent everything that we know. We need to be willing to experiment, to go into what I call the mystery, to try really new things that are fundamentally new, not just a little tweak and innovation, things that are new ways of living, working, and leading. And that is our mission, right? If we choose to accept it. But what that also means is that I want you to see the future, what is wanting to emerge, what is coming, as this uncharted territory. And we need to be brave enough to venture in that uncharted territory. And there's a real vulnerability that comes to that. In the sense that, if we're in the power and status world, a lot of what we're doing is we're trying to rise to the top to look good. It's like, hey, I've made it, so now you do what I'm saying and you follow me. Whereas when we're doing this new form of leadership, which is what I call next generation leadership, it's about being willing to actually go into vulnerability in the sense of, are you willing to step into the unknown? To not know what to do? Are you prepared to experiment, fail, and ultimately create the new maps? Because that's what we need. We need new maps. We need you to become the innovators, the inventors, the pioneers. And you might be listening to this and going, who, me? I'm not an inventor. I'm not an innovator. I'm just a normal person. And in that sense, we need to reframe the concepts of inventors, innovators, pioneers, in the sense of there is only ever going to be one of you in the whole history of humanity. You have unique potential, and you are only tapping a fraction of that potential and bringing it forward. Innovation, invention comes from being willing to dig deep into our potential and to express it back out. Because every time we do that, we actually transform the world because we bring our unique perspective through. But we need to do that within the existing context and what we want to be truly a stand for. We can't do it based on these outdated playbooks. And so my invitation to you is start venturing into the unknown. Make that choice. Be willing. So Star Trek was one of my favorite kind of series. Be willing to go beyond what any of us have gone to. And join the team, join together to start creating the new maps that we need. We need you to dream a new world into existence. Not just do what's always been done. And to channel that towards the shift that is happening now, towards a more sustainable, regenerative, and ultimately flourishing world where we can all thrive together with each other, with the planet, and every species that is here. And as I said, that is your mission if you wish to accept it.